Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon from the Philippines. Welcome to this fireside chat. This is one of the live events at the UNESCO Global Futures Literacy Summit, and we will be bringing you this fireside chat on Hiraya Foresight, the case of democratizing futures literacy in the Philippines. And this fireside chat is, of course, brought to you by the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, the Center for Engaged Foresight, the Development Academy of the Philippines, JSPDM, and the Northwestern University. For this fireside chat, we have three main speakers. We will have Dr. Lizan Perante Calina, who is, of course, the president of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society and also the president of the Philippines Society of Public Administration and currently the dean of the Graduate School of Public and Development Management of the Development Academy of the Philippines. We will also have Professor Sherman O. Cruz. As you already know, he is the vice president of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society and also currently the director and chief futurist of the Center for Engaged Foresight. And also, we are very lucky to have with us Dr. Marcus Bosse from the University of the Sunshine Coast, Australia. Dr. Marcus has been, an educator and a futurist for more than 35 years. And, maybe you've seen his books on the you know the dynamics of dissent. I think he co-edited this book with that was published in 2019 by Routledge, the dynamics of dissent, the theorizing movements for inclusive futures, and also a very new book from published by Palgrave, the phenomenologies of grace, the body embodiment and transformative futures. This for all who are in this plenary or for those who are watching now in YouTube or live stream in YouTube and also in Facebook Live, you may also ask your questions. Maybe during our conversation. Well, let's make this fireside chats. Really a fireside chat or maybe a conversation. All right. So I think let's start. No, maybe if we can have let's start with the keynote address of Dr. Dizan Ipirante Colina for maybe an information about the, the futures literacy, I mean, the efforts in the Philippines. Dean Lizan.
Yes, thank you very much, Doc Reg. Welcome to Hiraya Philippines booth. It's a virtual booth for UNESCO Features Literacy Summit. So let me begin by sharing my presentation to all of you. So as you can see, my background is the painting made by a Filipina. Later on, I will introduce her to all of you. So this presentation is about the Hiraya foresight, the indigenous base of futures thinking. I'd like to begin with the premise that we in the Philippines have been colonized for more than 300 years. And our theories, our frameworks, our laws are based on the exogenous model. And this exogenous model lead us to where we are right now. No? Our constitution, the decisions of the Supreme Court, our policies are really based on Western theories. But we find it apropos that we should consider an indigenous approach to policy making and to all our governance initiatives. And these indigenous concepts are hidden wisdom, wherein these words and phrases can shed more and deeper meaning to reality, thus the Hiraya foresight. The next slide shows us the Futures Leadership and Governance Framework crafted just this year because of the context. The context is COVID-19. And here, as you can see, we have futures thinking as one tool. We also have foresight, but there is a description there, and that is Hiraya. And another one is knowledge co-creation. But what wraps it all is frenetic leadership. Why frenetic leadership? Frenetic leadership is an ancient leadership model wherein we base our judgment, our decision on goodness. And that goodness is towards the common good. And in particular, that is for the general welfare of the Filipino people. But it is also equally important that we have to embed our own Filipino values. But we have to start with our vision as a country. And our vision as a country is to build a just and humane society anchored on our motto, which is makadiyos, makatao, makakalikasan, at makabansa. And that is our own language. No? So it's really about we are God-fearing, no? We are pro-people, people-centric, we are pro-environment, and of course, our love for the country. And our Filipino values are also incorporated here in this framework, like bayanihan, balikatan, malasakit, galang, ugnayan, and pananagutan. In fact, collaboration and cooperation are not just Western concepts. We have our own indigenous concepts about this cooperation and collaboration. And as you can see, we have this intergenerational responsibility doctrine. And that intergenerational responsibility doctrine was cited in the case of Factorian versus Oposa versus Factorian. And that is a case about environmental protection. And that the young ones who are not yet in legal age and who are not taxpayers have the right to protect their environment. This is about illegal logging. So with that, if we are to incorporate all these in one framework, then it will spell out the well-being of the Filipino people. Thus, the Hiraya framework. So we had this continuous search for an indigenous concept, and Hiraya is one. Hiraya is about an ancient Filipino word which means fruit of one's hopes, dreams, and aspirations. We at the Graduate School of Public and Development Management of the Development Academy of the Philippines have embedded or have interjected this already in our certificate courses across the Philippine bureaucracy. And also at the Philippine Features Thinking Society, it's really about how to operationalize this and how to ignite the Filipino Hiraya through the power of foresight. And we've started our knowledge co-creation activities, and we already started with democratizing Philippine futures thinking rather in the Philippines using Hiraya. So Hiraya um, is an ancient word, no? As I mentioned earlier. It's the only word that gives the potential of the future of tomorrow to illuminate on the present. And it is about kinabukasan or future. And Hiraya glows and red shades. Why? Because it subsumes a lot of unexpressed meaning significances and meaning implications. So Hiraya is really about wishing someone a goodness, no? Like for example, we say this like, may you reach your dreams, no? Also, may the wishes of your heart be granted, and hope it comes to pass, especially this COVID-19 pandemic. And also, Hiraya has its multiple meaning significances and meaning implications. Hiraya is about what? It's about vision. It's about cooperation and collaboration, as I mentioned earlier. It is about anticipatory and agile leadership and governance. It implies wisdom and ethics in action. And also, Hiraya implies that the future can be studied, analyzed, researched, and planned. But how are we going to institutionalize and systematize Hiraya? So, to do this, it's really about promoting, no, Hiraya foresight and democratizing it and sharing our knowledge about our indigenous concept of what is Hiraya all about. So in this slide, I would like to introduce to you this painting made by a 17-year-old Filipina. In one of our classes, we had a talk about Hiraya foresight, and one of the co-learners mentioned that her daughter has this Hiraya Manawari painting. So I told her, can we feature the painting in our UNESCO presentation? So it's very timely, and immediately she said yes, of course, with the permission of her daughter. And Ace, her name is Ace. Ace really cried a lot upon knowing it that her painting will be featured in this UNESCO Futures Literacy Summit. So as you can see, this is really about knowledge sharing. You continue to share your ideas, and by doing that, you have this so-called democratization of futures thinking in the Philippines. So it's been 8 months that we've been doing this, but again, we need to institutionalize Hiraya foresight. And how to do this? No? It is through education, through research, and through training. And of course, we need to find its home in the Philippines. And during our talk, we identified public administration, the field of public administration, as the home of futures thinking and foresight in the Philippines. So the whole range of foresight and futures thinking activities include foresight education, research, training, and advocacy. That is why we are here. We have the Philippine Futures Thinking Society as a professional organization. We have our education and training at the DAP Graduate School. And of course, with other institutional members, we have UP NCEPAG, we have Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Valenzuela, and other SUCs that are participating right now in this democratization of futures thinking, including the basic education sector. And with that, we're able to co-create knowledge through conferences and webinars. And now we are in the global platform, which is UNESCO, and we are privileged to be part of this UNESCO's Futures Literacy Summit. So futures thinking has been a concern over the past many decades. And of course, in the Philippines, we have our own initiatives. Now, as you can see, we have the Philippines A Century Hence by Dr. Jose Rizal. We have other literature, the Pamana, and of course, our ambition natin is doing its best also to have a long-term vision to achieve the aspirations of the Filipino people. So with that, we have the future studies just this time around this lockdown. And with this future studies platform at DAP Graduate School, we're able to further enhance our initiative in order for us to systematize Hiraya through research. That is why the Philippine Senate and the Philippine government, of course, is very supportive on this initiative. And we received funding to conduct research on SDGs and futures thinking through the chairmanship of Senator Pia Cayetano. And her committee is the Committee on SDGs, Innovations, and Futures Thinking. And likewise, we are honored to be part of the Millennium Project. We are the 64th node. Philippines, being the 64th node, has this great challenge to do research on futures thinking and foresight. And of course, we're able to present a number of ideas before the Senate Committee on SDGs, Innovations, and Futures Thinking. And our Hiraya story is all about these young individuals and dynamic ones. Now, we have also our advisors because we have to have the practical wisdom of our mentors and the pillars of public administration. So as you can see, we have the names there now, the beautiful faces of the team. And also from the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, we have the same team, no? Same team members, and we work together. We collaborate because that's very important in promoting futures thinking and foresight in the Philippines, particularly Hiraya foresight. So through knowledge, co-creation, and collaboration, we're able to launch this Philippine Futures Thinking Society, and we're able to invite a number of global experts on futures thinking. And likewise, we also had futures conversation with educators. You know, Secretary Liling is there, and this is also supported by UNESCO, UNACOM in the Philippines, no, and other um, institutions, higher education institutions. But equally important, we have to put premium emphasis also on the role of the youth in foresight and futures thinking. At the Graduate School of Public and Development Management, we have embedded a course or a module on futures thinking for our youth sector, and that is on the youth development with National Youth Commission. And what else? No, so as I mentioned earlier, we have the Millennium Project Philippines, and we have the membership. We have already a number of individual and institutional members. As you can see, we have the Pamantasan Lungsod ng Valenzuela as our first institutional member. And in leadership, in other leadership forums, webinars, we also have this futures thinking. The inclusion of futures thinking in the Philippines are is being felt by many already. No? And of course, we had this opportunity to share our Hiraya story with Dr. Marcus Bossi of the University of Sunshine Coast, Australia, who is also with us this afternoon. And in the House of Representatives, we're able to share foresight and futures thinking with Congresswoman Geraldine Roman, who is a graduate of DAP Graduate School on Certificate Course on Futures Thinking, with Senator Pia Cayetano, and of course, the pillar of Futures Thinking, Dr. Sohail Inayatullah. And what are some of the initiatives that we are going to push, right? Or our way forward? Our way forward is really to include futures thinking, Hiraya foresight in national policy making, and we are supportive on this initiative of Senator Pia Cayetano. And recently, as you all know, we had our APFN, and that was last November 19 to 21, and we are privileged again to be part of this global Pacific Features Network conference. It's our first time to host this event. And of course, we had an opportunity before the MPA students of Isabela State University and with the military sector. And last time, that was in October, we also embedded features thinking in the one of the topics now of the Philippine Society for Public Administration. So right now we are working with the Commission on Higher Education to have the state universities and colleges as well as local universities and colleges to be part of this initiative. And another storytelling was uh, last October with the full spectrum features. So we're able to tell our Hiraya story to them. And why Hiraya? So Hiraya really is an appropriate indigenous concept as our linguistic visual icon. Hiraya as a foresight concept and approach subsumes other meanings and connotations, as I mentioned earlier. And this indigenous concept will somehow bring us to um, a more indigenous, no, indigenous policies, governance measures that we together we can craft, no, with all stakeholders because it's very rich in meaning implications and meaning significances. And likewise, in other countries, we have they also have this indigenous concepts, and this will help or build up future thinking framework for the public sector. And lastly, it is only through going back to our indigenous roots that we find local wisdom in our own country. Hiraya, manawari po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Din Design. That was really, I think the future's thinking, right, in the Philippines is gaining ground now because of your efforts, because of this continuous discussion, continuous conversation that we've been doing. Trying to influence, of course, the public policy, right, the process in the Philippines, and I think that that's one big thing, right, that we can say that in the Philippines, futures thinking has really a great future, if I may. Right? So, but of course, the topic that we are discussing in this fireside chat, it is democratizing this. That we need to do more, right? We need to institutionalize this. Maybe we can have some how we can put this in our system, and even of course that very idea or that very concept of strategic foresight in public policy and everything that we do here in our country might be in a very good direction towards that end to have this culture of strategic thing or culture of anticipation, or maybe we have this culture of futures thinking, right? So I think we can have now our panelists, if it's all right, Prof. Sherman and Dr. Marcus, maybe we can start with Sherman with his speech, or and later on we can have Marcus also, on his thoughts on this democratizing futures thinking. Sherman.
Yeah, thank you, Reggie and Din Lizan, for that brilliant presentation. You know, when I was listening to, the Hiraya word alone, it works like a mantra to me. You know, a mantra is a Sanskrit word, that vibrates the spirit. And apparently, what I felt when every time Din Lizan was like using the word Hiraya and Hiraya Manawari, I felt the vibe. The vibration. Perhaps that's the power of a cultural perspective or narratives or worldview. And I think there are different kinds and different ways by which we could advance futures literacy. And one of the most, I think, my bias is, you know, uh, the most impactful, I think, the most transformative way of changing the way we, understand reality. And apparently, for futures thinking and foresight, imagination is the currency, right? And cultural narratives is and cultural traditions and cultural history. If you look back, that's pretty quite rich. In if you try to look into their stories, the way they've imagined and anticipate by using some sort of nature, emotion, the spirit, and the cosmos as some sort of their technology during the ancient times that uh, that makes wiseness possible, as an embodiment of a human being. Now, just perhaps a couple of things that I would like to add into, and perhaps to offer my views, some sort of to deepen what has been shared by Din Lizan. Of course, we've seen the how Din Lizan showed us that for the last 7 months, what has been done, in the field in futures and foresight, particularly the Philippine Futures Thinking Society. But of course, futures and foresight has, I would say, a 100 years or more of history, embarking from the work, of course, of Jose Rizal. And then, of course, we've seen the milestones. It was not easy to actually, like, achieve these milestones. It was possible due to the engagement and the commitment of all the people involved and those who helped us in the process of democratizing futures thinking in the country. And of course, I always see the effort as some sort of a journey. It's not like a one-time, big-time event. We're talking about the future here, and tomorrow never dies, as James Bond always say. Uh, and this is a long-term journey, my friend. The future is always open. The future is always emergent, and as long as our sun, the solar system, is with us, the future will definitely continue. But of course, there are some certain things that are beyond our control, and we should acknowledge that. We must be humble enough, to acknowledge that the future is something that we cannot easily predict. It's pretty kind of complex, and of course, through the democratization of Philippine futures thinking implies a lot of things. One is capacity building. In order for us to democratize really the future, we must learn futures thinking. That is why UNESCO, since 2012, has tried to figure out and explore ways by which we can make futures thinking, future studies, and the discipline of anticipation accessible, to each and every human being that exists today, and of course, for the generation that are not yet here. And of course, we've seen also, I hope you felt it, that the meaning that we've been trying to convey in our foresight journey, what it meant to us. It is. It is praxis driven while it is action oriented. We want to change people's mindsets, and changing people's mindset is not an easy thing to do. It has to mean to people in order to change their mindset. Futures literacy has to mean to people. It has to mean something, to those, who would, of course, in our journey, in the process, learn and engage with us as far as foresight is concerned. But there are four things that I would like to accentuate here, again, to democratize the future. And of course, the question always comes to mind that what differentiates Hiraya foresight from the different types and kinds of foresight that is being exhibited and showcased at the UNESCO Futures Literacy Summit. Our ways of doing foresight. Is it novel? Is it unique? Is it transformative? And then, of course, I think before we could actually like do that, there's a need for us to deconstruct what's Hiraya. The reason why we have here is for us to have a conversation of what Hiraya means to us. It has to be robust enough that we arrive at a foresight practice that is really inclusive, regardless of the biases and the categories that we used, to analyze the world. Uh, in in the 2 days ago, at the plenary session, I've been taking notes of what were the keywords this high level folks were dropping, were using when they describe what's futures thinking and futures literacy and how it is an essential competency in the 21st century. I've been hearing the words heterogeneity, highly local, diverse, these types of things. When I look and try to reflect back, this basically is what indigenous future is all about. And in fact, when we had the foresight workshop at the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, the word indigenous was all over the place. you know and of course, indigenous is a platform, but the vision, the goal really is to create a future that is nature centric, that we shift the narrative from the traditional step. Okay, going beyond the societal, technological, economic, political dimensions of how we explore and scan the future, but rather now to accentuate and emphasize nature, in the way we do foresight and embedded in the nature, because I think the only way for us to communicate with nature and to feel the spirit of what is natural is cultural, right? But then, of course, for Philippine Futures Thinking Society, for the Hiraya foresight, this is an evolving concept. Yeah. So we do not mean to that when we start defining what's Hiraya foresight, we do not mean to close the concept. We want to make it more robust. It has to mean to people, and they can actually create the meaning using their experiences when they apply the Hiraya foresight futures literacy approach. It has to be societal, cultural, nature centric, and of course, we do not. Political is very crucial, critical in the country. Of course, we know that the Philippines is a very highly politically charged environment, and we also acknowledge that, and that is why the home, the home of futures thinking in the Philippines is public administration, because we acknowledge the fact that when ideas, inventions, designs enters into the public realm, it becomes more complex, and you need to develop policies and programs to enable the enablers, to enable innovation. So, what must Hiraya foresight be? I would like to embark from what Rizal has written a couple of hundred years ago. When Rizal think about the future, when he was writing the Philippine Century Hands, if you try to read it, Rizal was highly speculative. He was writing in a speculative manner. His thought was highly speculative. He was predicting some possibilities because there was no futures thinking yet in foresight. He was using history to try to project, the possibilities for the next 100 years. But then he also acknowledged the fact that when he was trying to predict and he was trying to convey what where his preferences were, one of his preferences was to see that the Philippines emerge as a navigational country, as a center of navigation, something like that. That is the industry that we need to look into if we want to transform the country, beyond, the Spanish future, which of course that was his present. He was looking into navigation. He was looking into federalism. He was also assuming, that there is a possibility that there was another country, a foreign entity that would colonize the country. But he was not predicting. He was speculating. But apparently, in most of his speculation, that became the present, the history for the next 100 years. But apparently for us, we're still striving to achieve those that Rizal preferred as a future. And that is something that we really need to look into again. Hiraya Foresight must encourage speculation, because that's what is futures thinking is all about. Another one that I would like to see perhaps is that, okay, if we want to make a foresight and futures narrative that is highly cultural, then this, I think I got this insight when Marcus Bossi and I had a workshop at Northwestern University several years ago. Like if you want to diversify, like deconstruct foresight and make and accentuate, allow the cultural to emerge, is that perhaps we need to tap our linguistics experts. We have to some sort of study futures thinking, using language as a methodology or platform. We did that for the Ilocano language. Of course, for Ilocano, we say the future when translated to Ilocano is masakbayan. And then I contacted one UP professor in Baguio, and then we started deconstructing the word masakbayan. It has three parts. Ma, sakbay, and an. It has a prefix and a suffix, and then the word sakbay, which means, of course, it implies the current state of things, or be prior, to the current state of things. And then what we learned is that the future is not really out there. The time in the context of the Ilocano is not something chronological, but something that is experiential. That the future can be experienced now, like history, as what Ivana Milojevic said in one of his books. She wrote that the future, like the past, is an active aspect of the present. That resonates really with the indigenous context of future. So linguistic and language is something that we need to look into to diversify futures and foresight from a Horaya perspective. Another one is, of course, it was mentioned by Dean Lizan from the very beginning, our history of colonization. Of course, that was traumatic, but then perhaps what we need to do to actually explore and make sense of history is, of course, we have a tool that we normally use, and that could be one of the skill set that we need to develop, is the tool that was developed by Swahili Nayatula, which is called, of course, called shared history. The intent of shared history is not to look for, not necessarily to look for the traumas in the past, but the way I do shared history is that I try to look, for the victories that our ancestors have achieved in the past. Now, what were the innovations? What were the game changers? What were the sacrifices made in order for them, to transcend, their traumas? Our heroes were long-term thinkers. They were cathedral thinkers. Cathedral thinkers, when I say, is that they always think in the context of the long term, and their narrative were always informed by values, by worldviews. If you try to look into the writings of these heroes, they were always referring to independence. They were always referring to freedom. It wasn't material things. It was not even in the context of economic growth, but rather it is informed by values. And then, of course, I would like to see Hiraya Foresight as a metaphor. Metaphor for transformative policy making, metaphor for innovation, metaphor for strategy development, metaphor for learning. We can use Hiraya as a metaphor for transformation. But then again, just to close my comment, is the future is something that does not exist yet. And as Jim Dater have said, the future, there's no such thing as a future data. And the future is something that is open, di ba? Kinabukasan. Bukas, di ba? It implies open and tomorrow, right? So that is something that we can actually use, to innovate and transform today, which is the point of futures literacy. Again, Reggie, that's my piece. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sherman. I think that's really interesting points there. Maybe we can have the conversation after Marcus talk, if that's all right. Maybe also in our, for those who are here in our plenary, you may also write your questions or prepare your questions in the chat box, so maybe we can ask our panelists here. Marcus, if it's all right with you, yeah.
Yep. Okay. I mean, so much richness in the conversation so far that much of what I was thinking of saying, I've already been playing around with how to approach my thoughts differently. Hiraya Manawari, it's a fantastic use of, and it's a strategic use of language. And as Sherman was saying, that it's been a long time on my horizon that the linguistic nature of the future is underplayed and underexplored. And for me, that to do that is actually to extend the future's literacy capacities of any people. We can't think in a colonizing language. We must think in our mother tongue first, because that's where our deepest thought processes sit. You know, so for me then, it becomes about an intimate relationship with one's past and one's culture. We are cultural beings, and that to me is really important. And then if we start exploring alternatives to the way things are perceived and accepted as this is the real, what do? Well, we're actually becoming citizens, because it's only a citizen who has the capacity to operate and function with a degree of freedom and a degree of ability and capacity in the world that they inhabit. To be outside of the culture linguistically or as an imperialist or in other ways is to be stripped of one's power to some extent. So that's really brings into me something about the body and the embodiment of doing, because, you know, life's a journey about thinking and doing, and they work together. So when Sherman referred to praxis, you know, it's really important to understand that that's where theory and the real world meet, and where we actually experiment to see how something has an effect. What are the effects of certain concepts and so on? So this sense of citizenship then moves us into another area. So to be a citizen in a plural world, what does that mean? Because, you know, it's very easy, and I live in Australia where, you know, the Indigenous people have had a terrible run with colonizers for the last couple of centuries. You know, it's very easy to actually continue colonizing the Indigenous by treating them as a signifier for something that now we want. They're now becoming a cultural resource that we can exploit and draw from. So we need to actually go to the people who use that term, Hiraya, for instance, and actually develop bridges to them so that we're no longer on the outside, that we can actually become collegial, collaborative futures makers, futures thinkers. So that's a really important thing for me. So the future, I think, I always like this term, Richard Slaughter was the first to use it to my knowledge, is that the future is a principle for present action. Well, what does that mean? In a future's impoverished world where the language we use for the future is generally economic or statistical, or captured by the nation state in its most banal form, where violence is just taken for granted and so on, where actually our identities sit. Where do they sit? Well, you know, for me, we're born into history. We are actors in history because what we did yesterday is now the past. But we are nearly always, as the principle for present action suggests, we're acting because we assume certain things about the future. We assume that tomorrow the sun will rise, but we also assume that, you know, the Philippines will continue being the Philippines and Australia will continue being Australia. We assume that certain patterns are going to continue because culture is all about pattern making. So then we have to look at literacy in that sense. Well, literacy is a cultural capacity. It gives us access to our culture, but we, as I've just said, you know, culture is not static. So what does this mean for us? Well, it means that there's always change and there's always choice before us. But if we're futures illiterate, if we're culturally illiterate because we've not claimed our own cultural citizenship, okay, that means that those choices are invisible to us. It's kind of like being in a golden cage as a bird and opening the door, but the bird never flies out because it's comfortable within its cultural golden cage. This is something about that as a pedagogue, as a teacher, I've learned is that we need to disturb, we need to mess around with, we need to shake up the assumptions that people hold and we hold. It's always an inner world process first, internal process first. Where if we take what Sherman was talking about as Hiraya Manawari as a mantra, there's a mantric capacity, then we're working. A mantra is always, it's an inner technology. It's a subjective technology that we apply to our own consciousness to free us in that great yogic or tantric sense of freeing us from dullness and inertia and what I always think of as habit, basically just the habits of the world. So then literacy, cultural literacy, futures literacy become questions about how much freedom do we have in the world, and and how do we create knowledge? Because as cultural citizens, we need to start asserting our capacity, and we need to understand that literacy goes hand in hand with knowledge formation, with sense making, with engaging with the worldviews, with the cultural anchors of our societies, of our cultures, of our histories, and of our futures. We need to do that, and we need to do that by, as with reference to Rizal, for instance, Jose Rizal, and with reference particularly also to the indigenous, we need to turn to our traditions. But traditions have often been combined with violences and habits, mental frames, sense-making tools that actually do not liberate us, but actually hold us captive to certain presents that privilege those in power, those who have advantage, those who have more cultural citizenship, you might say, than others. So for me, we have to look at creative traditionalism because it provides us a way of engaging with our culture. We can cherry pick our traditions. Not everything in the Indigenous world was fantastic. There was nearly always quite a heavily gendered kind of society, social basis, for instance. There were many things there that you might say, well, we don't want to bring them into the present, but we do choose, and we can choose our traditions very carefully. I think a great example would be Mahatma Gandhi. Now, Mahatma Gandhi, he started off trying to buy into the imperialist vision. He trained as a lawyer, he dressed as a British man, but he was ostracized, thrown out. So he went from what I was thinking of as a defensive modernist, that means a person who adopted modernity in order to gain some credibility within the modernist world, to turn to his traditions, to the Indian traditions, to ahimsa and other concepts like that, in order to challenge the British hold on the dominant language and on the sense making of a modern India. And he was very, very successful. He is what I would call a cultural traditionalist, but he returned to it in a sense for defense. So he didn't ever advocate for India entering the modern world. What he was doing, his strategy could only lead him so far, because he was not so much a futurist as a traditionalist who was using his traditions to resist British imperialism. It's a really interesting look at the world through a lens of an example like that, like Gandhi. So, the last couple of points I'd like to make before we actually end up in a conversation, which I'm very much looking forward to, is I'd like to float this idea then. So if we're literate, if we can instill and democratize literacies, okay, and that means plural, democratize means to pluralize the languages of anticipation and futures, for instance, and to find cultural modalities to build the bridges we need to a democratic, futures-oriented Philippines, for instance. I think we need to understand that one of the things we need to do is look at culture as an algorithm and see ourselves as hackers. Hackers are people who see the potential, alternative potentials in the algorithms, and they turn them to their own use. So the computer hacker, gives us a metaphor for thinking about social and cultural hackers. So we hack the past because we have to come up with alternative histories. Histories are always written in the present to actually maintain certain worldviews, okay? But we also need to hack our present and in terms of challenging policy formation to bring in, as you have all been doing in the Philippines, bring in people who have influence within your government and within policy making and so on. Because, if we're looking at developing sustainable futures, okay, and we want to take that to heart, then we require a various set of literacies that are going to actually enable us to push the program forward. Okay, so a hacker sees alternatives, and for me, I just end on this concept that because Reginald mentioned my book, Phenomenologies of Grace, I would suggest that we can look at grace hacking and grace literacies of grace that expand and destabilize, but fill one with hope and with a sense of a future out there that's going to be rich for the Philippines and rich for the individuals and rich for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marcus. We also have here Dr. Rebulida. Good afternoon. Maybe if you want also to say something, maybe we can start now the conversation, or maybe if you can share some thoughts as well. Ma'am Rebulida, Dr. Rebulida, ma'am.
Wait, yeah. Yeah, I was just hovering around and listening to the presentation
Yeah.
so far by Dr. Sherman, Dr. Marcos, and of course, Dr. Disan. With regards to democratizing futures thinking, perhaps we can cascade this to our national and local governments and be able to bring this down to communities. So, and I'm also thinking that in terms of democratizing, that it be intergenerational. So here we're talking about different generations. Perhaps ahead of me were my mentors, then my generation, and I think the generation of some of you who were in our classes when I was still full time in the faculty, and then them as faculty, you as faculty, and down to the new students. So it's not only within the premises of the university that we can democratize futures thinking. But of course, the universities and academic institutions are the catch basin. It's so easy to put it there in the curriculum in some ways, but it's very difficult to change curriculum really in some universities. You know, it will take ages for the old timers to agree to the new ways of doing things. But it can easily be done if we democratize through the medium of our webinars, our training programs, especially to our local government units and also to national government, because they are the ones that have to respond immediately to the day-to-day affairs, not only of COVID-19, but to the demands of sustainable development. So how do we really envision the Philippines coming from the voices of the grassroots? So sometimes, no matter how nice the policies are, how nice the programs are at the top level, these are understandable to the top level people, but you know, you get the complaints and you get the violations down at the grassroots, down at the communities. And so they must have a sense of where they want their children to be, where they want their generation to be, and engage them in participating in the future now, specifically for disaster management and environmental. Dr. Lisan came up with with a slide with regards to the environment, if my memory serves me right. It was just a few minutes ago. But then that kind of anticipating typhoons, disasters should really be at the level of the communities. And now that people have experienced it, I think there's no reason why they will not be engaged in the future if they want to protect their property, they want to protect their life, their own lives, and the lives of the people down there. So we really need to democratize futures thinking and not use the old-fashioned folk thinking that have no science basis. But of course, we are indigenizing, so we also have to anchor on the past that they understand. So it's really a lot of language, as Dr. Marcos has mentioned, a lot of language, a lot of cultural anchorage for futures thinking, a lot of usage of our terminology, lalo na yung there in the local communities, what Hiraya means, no, and what the future means to them. Thank you very much for calling me out on this platform.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rebulida, and sorry for that. You know, I think I caught you surprised there.
Yes, yes.
But thank you very much for your thoughts, of course.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, maybe now we can start the conversation. No, our for those who are in the plenary, you may also ask questions. You can just type your questions in our chat box, and we'll get them. But maybe I'll just start with the conversation. No? Our panelists have mentioned really interesting points there. No, focusing on culture, looking at, of course, indigenizing, of course, the process of indigenization there. But I would like to ask this very basic question, if I may, so that maybe we can also have a clearer understanding of what we are discussing now. We're talking about democratizing futures thinking, or maybe trying to the very idea there that I get from that. It's more of that we need to teach our people, or maybe to teach our next generation of, or the skills of sense making, right? Or the skill of adaptation, resilience, and transformation as well. But how does it look really? Now, what are those strategies that you are trying to tell us when we talk about democratizing futures thinking? Maybe we can start with Dr. Bossi, Dr. Marcos, maybe also Sherman in this. Just just maybe a basic, or maybe a quick explanation for this.
Yeah, it's a great question, Reginald, and it's like the chicken and the egg in a sense. It can go round and round in circles. I think at the level of education, a lot can be done, but it takes will, because, as the previous speaker said, curriculum is very hard to change, and you can. But I have witnessed curricular changes that have failed simply because you've got people who don't have the skills to actually implement that curriculum. But if we put those kind of general inertia behind us, we can say that through education, we can start using new language and new words with the children, but also exposing them to activities and processes that engage and build their sense of cultural citizenship. In other words, their sense of agency, their capacity to achieve things. So, and I spent 20 years in primary and secondary schools before I moved into universities, where I've been for 35, 6 years or something like that now. 15 years, 35 years, all up and a bit plus. But at my university, and I've seen this at Tam Kung University and other universities, there have also been strong initiatives to mandate that every single student needs to do certain courses as part of their undergraduate degree, no matter what the degree is in. So at Tam Kung, they had it, I don't know if they still do, a compulsory futures thinking course for first year undergraduates. Everybody at the university who did it wanted to achieve anything, they needed to do that. At my own university, I teach futures at the postgraduate level, but I also hack the system by teaching futures-oriented history for first years and global history. So I'm teaching them about localized, global, and globalized processes simultaneously, and giving them tools to think about their choices more effectively. The course is called Global Citizenship. So it's kind of a giveaway, so that to actually own one's citizenship. And and many of those people who are doing this course are going to be educators. So to be an educator means that they're going to be affecting thousands of children or young people, or wherever they go, over their own careers. And they haven't started them yet. So let's assume for the next 40 years, they might be using some of the tools from Global Citizenship course that I've taught them. So this is the way. So at some of its influence, culture changes slowly, but it's also capable, like evolution, of sudden leaps. So we leapt into modernity from the pre-modern world, 1750 to 1850, in just one century. All the rules changed, basically, and it came at a huge cost. What the British did in India, what the Spanish did in Philippines, were done to their own people first. That we got to remember that they did it. The English working class were a miserable bunch. You wouldn't have wanted to be working in a coal mine in 1800 or 1850 or something like that. It was terrible. So I'll stop there, because I'd like to hand it over to Sherman for his thoughts.
Yeah, but before I give I would like to hear Dean Lizan's thoughts about it.
Okay.
Or maybe Dean Lizan and Sherman, if it's all right with you. I think I saw Attorney Ferdinand Nicolas here in in the plenary, if it's all right, maybe we can also ask his thoughts about the thing that we're discussing now.
Okay, sure.
If it's all right, Attorney Ferdinand Nicolas, sir.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and
Good afternoon.
good morning or good evening to other people around the world. I think one thing that I got from the initial statements made by our panel, one particular thing that we need to be conscious of, particularly in the use of culture in projecting to the future, because of course, and I'm sure it's probably the same with any other state that has, different ethnicities, different tribes, different, ways of thinking. The Philippines itself, as an archipelago, as a very regional country, even now we, 100 years, more than 100 years since the musings of Jose Rizal, we're still to some degree fractured politically, culturally. There's still some concerns about that, and in democratizing futures thinking, then definitely it has to be more of a concerted effort, widening the sources of input that we use in order to formulate our preferred future for the country. Of course, putting it in context makes it more relevant and makes it more the people would try to prioritize it. For example, as mentioned by Dr. Rebolida, putting it in context in terms of resiliency against climate change or particular natural calamities, then people would more readily forge together to formulate their own narrative in order to deal with a common concern. I think that would be one way of uh, encouraging people to participate in the conversation, because there is a specific need and possibly a common preferred future that is shared among them, that would motivate them to participate and to be more cooperative in the process. So yeah, the use of culture and the warning given by Dr. Basi is very, very relevant, especially in a we knowing our culture. Yeah, it's very it's good to note it. Thank you.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
Thank you very much, Attorney Nicolas. Maybe we can have now also thoughts from Sherman and Dean or other members that are here in the plenary. Maybe we can start with Sherman. Is that
No, I'm still trying to reflect and trying to make sense of what we've been discussing here. So I would like to pass on this to Lizan.
okay?
Okay. So, well, democratizing, no, I would like to take off from what Dr. Malu mentioned earlier. It's really about going down to the grassroots level. And the higher the access to knowledge on futures thinking, the greater the understanding and appreciation. So with that, it's not concentrated on a group of a few people or of an elite group, but it's really democratizing. No, everyone has a handle on what is features thinking all about, and with that knowledge, they will be able to embed that not only in policies, no, not only on governance measures, but also in their daily lives. Because what I learned from the model of Japanese management and leadership style is that aside from really providing mechanisms in their organization on how to operationalize based on context the frameworks that they learn from Western from the Western, they also provide mechanisms and tools on how that framework or mechanisms be applied in their daily lives. So it's really about an excellence way of life. So when we say Hiraya, democratizing Hiraya, we nurture that, we practice that, and it's part of daily living. It's really when we go further, when we go further for this Hiraya foresight, I think we'll be able to achieve our aspirations. I think that's also your aspiration, to have a regenerative city. You want to see a community wherein you have lots of greens, lots of trees. You can hear chirping birds. I mean, it's really going back to the basics, no? So we love nature and we have to protect that, not only for our generation, but for the next generation. And also our culture. We are rich in our, in our culture, of course. I want to see again our cultural dances, our songs. No, we perform abroad. We're really good. No, we got lots of recognition, but in our country, we really don't do that. No, when I was a little younger, I heard that in Paco Park we have this Sunday cultural show. So we showcase our dances, our cultural dances, songs, and among others. So it's really, for me, that's really about nationalism and patriotism. And this will lead us to developing our soft power. And we can, we can position our country in the international scene, no. And I'm always sorry. I'm always comparing to this um, Korean K drama. No, we have one subject in at the University of the Philippines about K drama. So it's about soft power. No, it was planned. No, Samgyeopsal, no, K-pop, UN leadership, and so on and so forth. So I think we can go further. No, and another thing is that we need to revive also, no, and support local products, because by using and consuming local products, we'll be able to promote nationalism and patriotism, and that is all about Hiraya, and that is all about democratizing Hiraya foresight. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, right? Maybe we're talking about democratizing Hiraya foresight, or this idea, this very idea of futures thinking. But when you mention about contextualizing, um, when we talk about contextualizing, I think it's not only for us to learn, right? I think we also need to unlearn and relearn things, because but there are lots of influences that the Filipinos, we were exposed to different culture, different maybe influences as well. That's why maybe it's the this very idea of democratizing futures thinking is more of it's not only learning, but also unlearning and relearning things that may really apply to us, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Reggie. Now, I have some thoughts on the previous question, and just to add what you
Sure. Yeah.
said. When we say democratization, normally, the worldview that we use automatically, subconsciously is something that's political. That's a given, right? Democracy is a political word. Now, however, I would like to place it in the context of the societal, right? Democratizing futures literacy in the Philippines from a societal context. Now, what it would mean to me if I would place democratization in a societal context is that futures literacy is some sort of it becomes some sort of a civilizational project, right? Futures thinking and foresight is like a long-term journey, right? It's long-term thinking, right? One good book, that I would like to to have right now to read is the book The Good Ancestors, right? And I'm pretty it's pretty amazing to see how this guy was able to, like, connect all of this different stuff that influences and shapes people, how and how they imagine the future. And then, if we all want to become a good ancestor, and democratization is one of the means in doing that, and if an approach is something societal beyond the political, while political influence is very crucial and critical, we have acknowledged that in the Philippine Futures Thinking Society to a certain extent. In fact, to a massive extent, you need to have some sort of access to power, right? because at the end of the day, the future is something that the powerful and the marginalized will have to continue to some sort of struggle for. Everybody will have to define what the future should be, and it will be about preferences, and that's where the future narratives becomes political. Now, if it becomes societal, now how do we approach that? One, of course, is obvious, is capacity building. How do you democratize the future? That is what UNESCO is trying to like push right now at the global level. Access to futures literacy in the through capacity building, because UNESCO sees futures literacy as a skill set, you know, and a capability to use the future to innovate in the present. It's a capability. The economic folks would like to look at it in that way. And Riel Miller is an economist, and that is the language of the World Economic Forum. Always economy, 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 other than the other drivers of change. That's why they place it in the context of capability and skill set. Now, if you try to look at it from the context of the societal, now, what I would like to see is that if we could, in the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, use Hiraya Foresight as some sort of a foresight philosophy. Our project is like changing mindset, like transforming mindset. What if Hiraya Foresight is constructed in the context of philosophy? That I learned that when I met some of our colleagues and friends in South Korea. Of course, it's still academic, but these people really are into public policy too. But then every time they try to reframe something, whether it's technology, a policy, or whatever that is, they always embark from a philosophical point of view. They use metaphors, right? They use worldviews like tangerines, no, because using philosophy as a context, as from as an embarkation point, it enables you to actually become more creative, because your power to interpret things, also increases, diba? At the end of the day, futures and foresight is really not just about the news headline or the system, but then I read in one article wrote by an HR manager into one of the biggest organization in the world. Really, the real change occur when it is approached at the worldview and the metaphor level. That's the story that we tell ourselves. So, and then in that view, if it becomes societal, I would like to see futures thinking and foresight as a human right, di ba? As a basic human right, as a new type of public good. Kasi UNESCO has defined the future as a resource, as an asset and a tool. If the future is a resource, it should emerge as a public good.
Thanks for
Yeah,
that.
and
Yeah,
Doc
Lisa.
Reg, in addition to that, there's a good question here in our chat box, and that's from Dr. Bossy, no? And he asked the question, how are we going to measure, no? How will we measure the success of Hiraya Foresight and the democratization of futures thinking? So actually, I'm looking at it's actually not the metrics I'm not looking at the metrics, but really about changing the mindset. So the impact is different, just like our traditional indicators, now GDP, GNP, but then of course Bhutan introduced gross national happiness. So it's something in that along that line, no? And I'd like to emphasize also that Hiraya is ethical, no? Ethical, as I mentioned in one of the presentations just this week, no? Why ethical? Because we are deciding for our country, no? And it's really based on our on practical wisdom, no? It's ethical because no particular practitioner on foresight and public administration adopts wicked means, no, in solving a present day problem, and it really directs itself to what is right, just, and fair for everyone. That's why earlier I pointed out that our vision as a country is to build a just and humane society. It's a 1987 constitution, and I'm already 40 plus years old. And how the question again, and still the question is, how are we going to operationalize that? No, how are we going to build a just and humane society? So if we embed ethics, no, and in foresight, in this area of foresight, I think we can advocate, no, and will not be afraid to reason and explain, no, um, why we are disturbing the status quo. And Dr. Marcus mentioned that earlier. That, and of course, Dr. Alex always mentioned this, that we need to disturb the status quo. And we are disturbing. And I think what we are proposing and telling you now will somehow um, uh, made you think, no, why Hiraya Foresight, and how are we going to achieve this, and how are we going to realize that? So this is a work in progress, and we need you to collaborate with us. And as we always say, para sa inang bayan. So this is for the Philippines, and this is for our future. That's it.
Just to add on that, sure, who wants to speak? If
Sure, Sherman. Yeah, you go.
okay, sure. I just recalled, embarking from what Dean Lisan have said about the future in Foresight, because I visited one of the booths a couple of days ago, on day one. Of course, they're my friends, and I went to check them out. And then it's Hanse University, in Norway, I think. Is it in Norway? So, but Hanse University, they have a UNESCO chair institution which is Hanse University. And then I was just curious about, okay, how are you? What were you doing? What are the things that's going on right now for Hanse and futures literacy? And then one insight and the learning that I got really, in that conversation that perhaps we can take away as some sort of embed in the way we do futures thinking in the Philippines. They said that, okay, how might we now placing that in the question of how might we democratize futures literacy in the Philippines? And then here comes the issue of ethics. You know, she told me, Annette, is it Anne or Annette? She told me that, Sherman, the future and foresight is precious. It is a treasure that we all have right now, and that is if it is precious, and if it is a treasure, then you have to be careful enough, responsible enough, and accountable enough, in the way you design the work that you do. So design is very critical in the way we do futures literacy and foresight. You just don't do futures literacy and foresight for the sake of it. Like, you have to carefully construct a design, that makes people realize that the future is something that is precious, you know. So, and then, okay, what were the design that you've been doing? Of course, it begins with capability building. How do you democratize people? You just don't teach futures and foresight in the context of knowledge and awareness as an outcome. You have to teach people how to facilitate futures workshop. And we empower them if we give them the capability to facilitate foresight conversation. I think that was my takeaway. Design, enable, capacitate people to do it themselves.
To add on that, I think,
Yeah. Doc
please, please,
Reggie, one
sure,
sentence
sure,
only.
sure.
And I think it should be part of the lifelong learning. That's it.
Wow. Yeah,
Exactly.
I would like also to add on that, Marcus. I think your question is really, really very good. For me, I'll take it something like this. It's two levels. Competence transfer and the activity transfer. When I say competence transfer, it's more of course, the process of um, teaching them, or teaching the people those tools, and of course, or to understand the creation of future, right? Or maybe teaching them all these skills. Um, and the level of the ability or the activity transfer is more now that these people may be able to co-design and co-create. That they have the ability now to create or to participate or be part on the of creating or for that preferred future, or maybe on that emerging future. So I think with that, maybe we can also look on the
Yep.
we can take this as a success indicator for the or democratizing Hiraya foresight.
Correct.
And can I add
Yeah,
that
right.
part of this democratization process is about building cultural pathways that are legitimate but don't get recognized in the current regime. So as I put in the chat, we need new songs and stories and dreams and so on. But we also need to recognize that we need to deinstitutionalize foresight. It's not something simply that policymakers do or the government does or that some expert does. We need to actually naturalize it. It needs to be given to people, that their capacity to anticipate, their local knowledge, their indigenous knowledge, if it's indigenous as well, are all tools that are legitimate within a sense-making world that actually embraces the future and futures thinking.
Yeah, great. And I think it's more of, if they can have all those skills, right? It's actually empowering them, right?
Yep,
That's
absolutely.
the most important. I think the direction, or the result that we want to have. That the result of this democratizing futures thinking, or teaching them, or futures teaching them all these skills. That's actually empowering them, right?
Mm.
Maybe that they have empowered, and that they're able to create, and they are able to be part, or to participate in creating or maybe that preferred future for them, right? I think that's for me at least. I think that's one important indicator that we need to look at, looking at whether or not this democratizing Hiraya foresight is successful. Because when we have these empowered people, empowered citizens, here in the Philippines, we have different cultural characteristics. We're living in an archipelago, when we empower these people, and they can really participate in all the process, of creating a future for them. I think that would be great.
Yeah, Attorney
Excellent.
Ferdy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking for the raise hand
Function.
button here. I
Sorry.
can't find it, so I just raised my hand. Anyway, I'm wondering if there is any lobby for a Futures Day, or a future celebration. Yeah, to nationalize the movement. And definitely the Filipinos being very artistic. We export so many performers. We're known, all practically in any organization. There's someone who sings well, who dances well, who you know, and it's an expression. What I really appreciate about futures thinking is the synthesis between the artistic, the culture, and the data and the statistics, and harmonizing them in order to forge not only head knowledge of what we want to see in the future, the numbers that we want to see, but drawing from the heart, which like I said in the chat, Dean Lizan, it's her statement is really moving. We all, I think, experience some cynicism at some point in our lifetime. And yes, definitely that comes with wisdom and what we have experienced. But armed with that, perhaps, yes, to reinvigorate a hopeful future is something that we really need, that all countries need. And of course, for our countrymen, we really need something to drive us forward, and to, you know, sorry, it's a bit of a cliche, join hands. I don't know, you know, sing kumbaya. I don't know. So, you know,
Well, we can see
but
that.
really, really,
Hakuna Matata. Hakuna Matata.
you know, yeah, I dated myself with a kumbaya, I think. But yeah, something to drive us forward, something to a common dream, to work for, and to even sacrifice for. It's something that can be a unitive factor, or unitive, um, uh, yeah, thing for us to come together, really. Yeah.
Well, I'm just typing so I could talk, couldn't I? Because everyone's quiet. Prosperity itself needs to be redefined. We need to actually develop, like the metric that Dean Lassan mentioned, the gross national happiness or whatever it might be. But we actually need to actually look at the future of prosperity in a world where physical resources are going to be in decline. How do we actually redefine a meaningful, prosperous life, a life worth living? Okay, that's so again, that's a language thing, because I've talked definitions, but it's a language thing that's always linked to how do we practice meaningful living, and that's sort of, it's kind of a spiritual question, but it's also actually a very pragmatic question. I think there's a lot at the pragmatic grounded level that needs to be done as well. Shall we start singing Kumbaya?
Yeah, that's a great point, Dr. Marcus. The question on how do we practice meaningful living?
Yeah.
Very. It makes me think. But of course, I agree also with the point of Dr. Ferdy. We need to have a common dream.
Yeah.
And foresight and futures thinking is participatory. It's participatory. So maybe next year, what we're going to do is really to have this Hiraya Foresight Festival. That's another thing to look forward to. And I think coming from our friends, no, from different regions will converge in one platform to share what will be our common dream for the Philippines.
Mm.
So we need to have also that,
Reggie, ano,
yeah,
your
I saw
internet.
some messages, a theme song or an anthem.
Oh yes, I
Nawawala,
think that's a good
Dean or
idea. Yeah,
Sherman, nawawala yata yung internet connection ko.
yeah. Okay na, okay na. We can hear you.
Yeah, we need a Hiraya theme song. We have well, of course, many artists who are willing to do that. Maybe the attorney Freddy can can create one, no? With this Northwestern University. Or we can combine artists from different
Yeah.
parts of the country. That would be
Mm,
great as well.
yep.
Yeah,
Wow,
we'll
that's
do
good.
that.
Nice.
Oh,
Yep.
Maybe we can tap national artists like Joey Ayala or yeah, one of the
Mm.
folk singers, songwriters.
yeah, I think you would love that.
Mm.
Yeah, we'll message him later on after this.
Yeah, so I think we had a very good conversation, right? Maybe just one thing, just last thing, if Marcos will allow me, I want to know about that cultural hackers. Please, if you can just say something more about that on
Sure,
cultural hackers, please.
sure. I guess because I have taught history for a long time, I see history as a process. It's not a list of dates or anything. It's actually a process, and it's constantly being edited by whoever's got an interest in defining the present in a certain light. And that's led me to actually look at the way we tell our stories. So to me, storytelling is a very natural human capacity. And yeah, every time a story gets retold and it shifts over time, it's changing the story, but it's also changing the perceptions of the storyteller, but also of the listeners. So if we start changing our stories because we are now thinking stories should be, let's say, or need to be, or are strongly attracted to a futures horizon, okay? So the story might be something that we're familiar with, but it suddenly shifts in a way. And to do that is you're hacking the story, because as soon as you change the linguistic elements of the story, the narrative storyboarding of the story, you could call it, you're starting to shift people's attention. Now you can see this in the movies that we're getting all the time at the moment. We can see all sorts of things coming out in the movies, and these movies have a major impact on people's consciousnesses. So to have empowering movies is an important thing. Not so much in the kind of romantic dizziness of a Bollywood or maybe of a Disney movie on steroids. But what I'm thinking more about is, again, how do we portray meaningful life but in the sense that this thing Masan and I and Sherman were talking about, for instance, every time we do something like that, it enters the cultural domain. So everything is viral in that sense. I'm thinking very much philosophically now, but I see this as a viral process where each idea it comes up against another. Each image, the images are more powerful than any word we might have. The image of Hiraya that's behind Dean the Sun there is beautiful. It's attractive. It says everything you might want. That's right. Everything you might want about a future in which, of course, a very strong woman. So it's more gender equity and all sorts of stuff. It's inclusive of indigenous themes in terms of the beading and the hair and the colors and so on. And nature is very present. So these are all messages to the future. So to me, it's a viral process. So when we introduce a new concept or a new idea, a new song, a new image, it's opening up always to possibilities of hybrid things forming that weren't there prior. And as soon as the hybrid enters, it never leaves because it's already part of bonded with culture. Once you've got the idea of freedom, once people in North Korea get the idea of freedom, nothing can stop them ultimately other than that they will achieve that. It might be 100 years from now, just like the idea of freedom in the Philippines was a long time coming. I'm thinking about Jose Marti and his Song of Freedom in Cuba, for instance, Guantanamera. These sorts of images, they stay and they get down into the bedrock of the cultures. So to me, hacking is about understanding that my cultural citizenship, my creative traditionalism can draw on elements that are common to all, but actually shape a new vision, a new potentiality. Does that help?
Wow, thank you very much, Marcus, for that. That's great, and of course, it's very inspiring. Thank you very much. So, do we have any questions from the plenary? I mean, if you have questions, you may ask now. Um, any questions so far? Shida, if none, maybe maybe we can wrap up our session now. Before we wrap up our session, if it's all right with our panelists, just quick maybe a closing, if it's not all right. Attorney Nicolas first, and then we'll have also Dr. Rebelida if she's still here. Sorry, and Bizan and Sherman, and we'll end it with the statement or closing of Marcus. If that's all right.
Mark.
Uh, I'm a bit surprised I'm not a panelist in this
Yes.
event. Nevertheless, it's really an interesting conversation. I think, of course, um, I am definitely, even if we've had futures here since what, 2012, 2011, I think. Of course, I'm still very new to the literature, preparing for my presentation tomorrow. But really, uh, it's something that can bring people together. And I think that one of the reasons why there's still less participation is really we do still need to have more people participate in these fora, to think of these concepts as a way of forging forward whatever, because the applications are actually very varied. It's not just for governance. Yes, it is for private institutions. Yes, it is even for cultural organizations, local communities. The applications are very varied, and there's a lot of potential in this. So hopefully, um, even myself, I guess if I did not cram on reading literature on futures thinking, I would not have the vocabulary. I would still be like processing everything that has been delivered today. But yes, it's something very exciting, something nice and promising to share with others and to get them excited as well, to work for a common preferred future for all of us.
Thank you very much, Attorney Ferdi. Dr. Rebelida, ma'am, we're still here.
Yeah, yes, I'm still here. perhaps I'm thinking that we can put together the
Yes,
vocabulary of futures and foresight thinking within the discourse of governance. And governance itself has already many adjectival prefaces: participatory governance, we have good governance, and here I think we are introducing also the term anticipatory governance, and we want it to be inclusive as well. So all this vocabulary gets together that we need to translate in more understandable terms beyond the maharlika level, the elite level, the educated level that we are all immersed in the literature. And if you read the literature, as Attorney Ferdinand has said, the words are so deep, and the language not very Filipino, and maybe the European thinking is not necessarily in the same discursive pattern as the American and the Filipino way. So we need to also learn to think about the vocabulary that we can bring down to democratize, to make it inclusive across regions and across levels of communities. Thank you.
thank you very much, Dr. Rebolida. Dean Lizan?
Yeah. So, and also I would like to add, no, in that vocabulary, Hiraya foresight. And all I can say, it is only through going back to our indigenous roots that we find local wisdom in our own country. Hiraya Manawari.
Thank you very much, Dean. Sherman?
Yeah, actually, this conversation has given me a lot of insights and ideas. In fact, just to share with you, Attorney Ferdinand, Nicolas, Dean Lizan, and I are currently working, on our application for a UNESCO chair institution at the UNESCO. So our intention has been listed already in by UNESCO, and in fact, it was mentioned, I think in day two, that Northwestern University will be the host institution for the UNESCO chair institution. And I think within this group, I think we can actually derive some, a team, to to create the UNESCO chair team, hopefully next year. And with that in mind, I would like only to go back, to Rizal's, because I studied Rizal essay, the Philippine Century Hense, and I would like to perhaps paraphrase him, no? And try to make it in today's context, And I'm awestruck, with his wisdom, And he said that for Rizal, the future has always been above material considerations, and that there are emerging others, that there were invisible influencers, ethical in nature. This is his words, that are far more powerful and transcendental, and that might likely shape the future of our country. And then, as of course, for the UNESCO Futures Literacy, it had gained home in the Philippines, and I think, with the conversation that we've been having, and with the experience that we've had, in promoting futures literacy in the country, that I think the concept of UNESCO Futures Literacy, as espoused by UNESCO in our context from the Hiraya Foresight perspective, has metamorphosed into a socio-aspirational vision. So that's Hiraya Foresight. That's the case of democratizing futures literacy in the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Sherman. And we'll have Marcus.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation, just so rich. I think what I'd like to do is to turn back some attention just onto the question of the Indigenous. I'm seeing this as a global phenomenon, the turning to Indigenous wisdom. It's been going, you can take it back 30, 40 years or even longer. There has been an ongoing sense that the Western civilization and the imposed elements of that have been on colonized countries, that we've lost something, that we're missing something. And that's the relational context. That, the heart, the relational context of heart relatedness, which, if you go beyond all the romanticized stuff around Indigenous, is essentially what the Indigenous peoples were sustained on. They were part of the world, the environment. They didn't dominate it in the same way that Western civilization and other imperialist civilizations, and you can look all over the globe for those, have done. And I think climate change, COVID-19, and the range of other issues that have globalized our, I think that the nakedness and the isolation of the human species and have exposed it. You know, in my mind, I've just been starting to write about the fact that human beings are the lonely species. We are disconnected from one another. We use our devices to try and connect and so on, but we're even disconnected from our own inner selves. And I think the whole point of this turn to the Indigenous is not to sort of some new agey thing. It's actually a really practical thing that our societies to evolve in a way that is participatory, democratic, inclusive, co-creative, that we need to learn from the Indigenous wisdom of the past and to synthesize it with, of course, the current worldview, so that it's not back and being without and having to all wear grass skirts and not having air conditioning anymore. Hopefully we can have air conditioning and stuff like that, because I live in a hot place like you guys do. But, you know, the point is that we are on a quest, an evolutionary quest. And this is bigger than the Philippines, Australia, or anything. It's actually a global quest to find and reconnect. Morris Berman and people wrote books like The Reenchantment of, you know, the world and so on. We need to re-enchant our world so we could treat it as sacred, and all more than human stakeholders, as well as the human stakeholders, all have a meaningful place within it. I want to end with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I think that's I think it's a very good conclusion for this session. Thank you very much. Of course, thank you for our proxy panelists, Attorney Ferdi, and also Ma'am Rebulida, Shermon, Dilizan, and Marcus. Thank you very much. I think we have a very good conversation, a very a very rich conversation for this afternoon. Thank you very much. And also maybe we can also make this announcement out that we are again inviting you for the session tomorrow. Thank you very much, and Hiraya Manawari.
Thank you so much, Hiraya Manawari. Maybe you can open your video camera so we can have a picture taking. I think Nicole is there. Hi, Nicole, at the back end. Yeah. Okay. So let's open
So I'll
your
see my
video.
lights.
Yeah. Let's have a photo op. Okay.
Okay, everyone, please turn on your photos for our picture taking. Turn on your videos, rather. Okay. Let's wait for a few more people. I see them turning on their video cameras. Okay, I will be okay. Come on, everyone. I'll be taking the photo in a few seconds, so please turn on your your video cameras. Okay.
Say Hiraya Manawari.
Yes.
Hiraya.
Say Hiraya. Okay. At my count, 1, 2, 3. Hiraya.
Hiraya Manwari.
Okay, that's one photo. We have several screens, so please bear with me. Just keep smiling, everyone. Okay. Again, 1, 2, 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat. Hiraya Manawari po sa ating lahat.
See you
Thank you,
tomorrow,
Dr. Rosie.
See you
Bye.
tomorrow.
See you
Bye-bye.
tomorrow.
Thank you, Ma'am
2
Lulu.
p.m. The Futures of Higher Education. Use the same link to join.